Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to today's episode of Talking Point. I'm your host, Syed Neaz Ahmed. In our studios today, we have a distinguished guest who has almost devoted his entire life to community service. He is none other than Dr. Muhammad Abdul Bari, MBE. He's an educationist, community activist, author of parenting, and consultant in the Muslim community here in Britain. He is presently one of the trustees of Muslim Aid. He is a former Secretary General of the umbrella organization known as MCB, Muslim Council of Britain, from 2006 to 2010. He is also chairman of the Board of Trustees of East London Mosque, which is known also as LMC, London Muslim Center. He has authored a number of books, and his services were recognized by the Queen Elizabeth, and he was awarded an MBE in 2003, a Fellow of Royal Society of Arts in 2005, and an Honorary Fellow of Queen Mary University of London in 2008, and getting nearer our time, an honorary doctorate from the University of East London in 2012. Wow, quite an achievement. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure and honor, sir.
Thanks.
For the benefit of our viewers, I have detailed some of the achievements, but I would like to know, how did this journey begin? I know that you went to Chittagong University, a briefest stint at Bangladesh Air Force, and then you decided to call it a day and come over to England. When did it begin, and how did you decide, why did you decide to join community service rather than become an academic as you were?
Well, it's a long story. I was physically very hyperactive in my childhood, so sports was my interested area. So I joined Air Force, and then got a scholarship to come to Britain to do PhD in King's College. While I was doing research in King's College, 3 years PhD and 3.5 years in Royal Holloway College, I became increasingly involved in the Tower Hamlets Bangladeshi community in the beginning, especially young people.
Did you live in the area?
I always lived in South London, but East London was my second home. And I realized that some of the very talented young people at that time, mid-80s, mid-1980s, were working in restaurants, and some of them were working in the factories. Factories don't exist anymore. And I found them really talented, and I used to
as part-timers or? Well,
that's voluntary. I was terribly busy in my PhD because I lost a few years in Air Force. So I only used to come most often every Saturday to spend 2-3 hours with some young people. And I was requested by the then mosque administration to help some young people.
Yes. Which mosque?
Islam Mosque. And I became chair, and I'm not chair anymore of Islam Mosque, but I'm trustee.
When did it?
That was in mid-80s.
When was the East London Mosque established?
Well, the history goes back to 1910.
1910.
1910, but it was not a mosque in the beginning, and it was
a makeshift.
Well, people used to hire places from 1910 to 1939 in different places. In 1939, the mosque management bought 3 houses in Commercial Road, not far from here. And from 40 to 75, the mosque was based in those 3 properties. Then in 1975, the compulsory purchase order of GLC, Greater London Council, evicted the mosque, and they gave a place in the current place, Philgate Street and Whitechapel Corner. So from 1975 to until now, the mosque is over there. So I used to come.
It's not just a mosque; it's a landmark.
It's a landmark. It's a complex with Mariam Center, London Muslim Center. So I used to come every Saturday to help some young boys, and some of them were students, some of them were working in the factories, and I then fell in love with the overall our homeless community, especially
Right,
Bangladeshi community at the time.
You saw an opportunity to improve the situation.
Yeah, so then I realized the potentials of many people, and me and one of two or three of my friends then discussed with the boys whether they would like to pursue the education career, because their career was blocked. And some of them said definitely, others said my dad and mom have to be convinced.
Yeah.
So sometimes we used to go to different houses to convince their mom and dad that your child has a better future. And
but they were working out of economic necessity, isn't it?
probably out of necessity, and probably it was a culture that young people work and earn some money, is hard money, cash money. And fortunately, most of them were able to come into the education, although some of them were in their adult life.
Right.
And we found really it rewarding that we helped some of them.
Did you establish special schools for them, or
No,
could they go to the normal schools?
They went to normal schools. Some of them went to just the NBE, the adult education colleges, and most of them came out of restaurant and the factory job. And some of them are doing good jobs now. Some of them are now leaders of Islamic mosque.
Right.
So that's how my journey started. And when I was doing research, postdoctoral research in Royal Holloway College in physics, I then compared my life in the laboratory, where I published quite a few papers in the international journals, but then realized that I have to be in the laboratory all my life. Being away from the community was the benefit.
Detached from everything.
Yeah, detached from everything, because if I have to do better, because I had always been aspirational, ambitious, that I have to do certain things in my life.
Right.
So I wanted to go to the top of physics, but for that I have to be away from the community. So I made my judgment, and that I probably have to.
Is that when you decided to become a school teacher?
That's when I decided to become a school teacher. After doing a PhD, my wife and few others, they said, "Why are you doing this?" Especially in Bangladesh, working in the university and become a secondary teacher, it was a sort of degradation.
Yeah, that's our psyche.
In our culture. I said, "Look, forget about this." Because teachers.
So you had to do PGCE.
I did PGCE. I then got a job in North London, first job. That was a very tough area, and Broadwater Farm area.
Yes.
And where one of the police officers was killed in 1985. So nearly 6 years in that school, survived. There were Bengali kids.
Is that Tottenham?
Tottenham, yeah. Bengali kids, Turkish, Kurdish, black. It's a very difficult school.
Rough area.
Rough area. But I think I survived well, because my nature was to build relationship with even young people. From then onwards, I started building relationship with young people and some of their families. And then I moved to Tower Hamlets with special needs education. I didn't have any experience on that, but authority thought that probably I would be useful. And on the job, I learned quite significantly, very rapid learning. Initially, I was in the learning, children with learning difficulties, anyone who has learning difficulties.
Like autistic?
Autism, it is normal learning difficulties.
Slow learners.
Yeah, slow learners. Then I moved into children with behavior difficulties. That was a bit daunting, but I not only survived.
That's a very polite word for rowdy students.
Yeah, rowdy students and difficult children, and those children who were to be excluded from schools because of their behavior. Our job as a teacher was to go to different schools and work with individual children, with the teacher, with the family, with the different education agencies, so that they were not excluded from schools.
Were these students Muslim, from Bangladeshi community?
All
or
sections.
All sections.
All sections. But because Tower Hamlets secondary, primary, mostly were Bengalis. So there are Bengalis, there were Somalis, there are few whites, boys and girls. So through this, I learned the challenges in the young people's life. I was youth, but I forgot my youthfulness at the time. But I learned so much by dealing with them, going to their families, and what clicks, the way they do things, what was the challenges. And there were harrowing stories of some families. and they were struggling and not able to cope. So that's how I became more involved with the community, it was a learning curve for me.
Right.
It was also a sort of a leadership quality amongst the young people. It was different from classroom teaching, but those young people were really, really challenging. But once again, my nature was to build relationship, and I didn't treat myself as a teacher. Sometimes I became a mentor, sometimes I became a friend, sometimes I became just ordinary person in the community. So there was some advantage that when it came to Muslims, normally Somali and Bangladeshis, I was a Muslim, they were Muslims, although many of them were not practicing. That really worked well. So it was, in my opinion, an enriching period in my life, and I learned personally so much things, and I feel confident to work with young people, and since then I have been working with young people, especially now young professionals.
Great. Reflecting back, Dr. Bari, do you think that the same sort of problem still exists in our community, or particularly Muslim community, that which you experienced at that time? I mean, what were those problems?
Well, there are children grow in a family, and that's how I also came into the world of parenting. Children grow in a family, and children are children. They are vulnerable. They come new to the world. They don't know anything. As if they suddenly come to this world, and it's their parental world, it's their home, it's the family, it's the adult around them that shape them. And if a family environment is, say, not conducive for a child's upbringing, shouting, there's probably no discipline at home, or some families were broken or dysfunctional, and care.
Was also the housing problem?
There was housing problem as well. There was some physical problem. There was some emotional issues. All these compounds a child's behavior. And I've seen children coming from a very well behaved young person to totally different. And I knew children who were ending up in drugs and violence and ending up in Feltham young people's prison. I know parents who in their old days were very religious, but in their youthfulness, when they were young parents, and they personally told me that they didn't bother about the parenting, and they didn't look after the children the way they should have been. And in the old days, they used to cry because their children ended up in prison and lost their life. So all sorts of stories really moved me. And then I thought, what about parenting? Personally, at that moment in my time, Town Hamlets Council decided to educate or train some teachers and some social workers to do the parenting course. It was, I think, 2001 or 2002. So I was the first in the batch of those teachers and workers, social workers, to do this parenting course. So we used to run parenting course across the schools and different places. And then I realized that
Dr. Bari, on this very interesting point, we have to take a commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll definitely go back to parenting and the problems of parenting. See, thank you for being with us. Don't go away. We'll be back soon.